I'd like to read them in a little bit different sequence. But we were sent by the Senate to try to find an answer. A very difficult process. And I suspect that everybody watching this is trying to figure out what the answer is, just like we are. Telephone calls, I've just been advised, into my office, absolutely split down the middle. I would hope that nobody would do it by polls, but would do it by their best judgment. And I would hope that we might find a way where we are sure that when we do a confirmation process, we're always dealing with the facts. I don't know the answer on this one. We still have a long time to go. You can think of 100 places you'd rather be. I can think of at least 100 places I'd rather be, all in my home state. And we may never come to the final conclusion we want. We may never come to the final conclusion. What has happened here? And you know, if that happens, this is even a greater tragedy than many think. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Let me, Judge, say a couple things, and we'll let you go. First of all, this, unfortunately, is not the first time this committee's been presented with a situation like this. It's been the first time we've been presented one that involved a Supreme Court justice. We have other people nominated before this court where there are allegations by former wives of mistreatment and wife beating. There's no appropriate form to resolve that, as you point out. Now, we have an option in that particular case to say, well, we'll send it to the court first. Before we decide whether to confirm this particular person, have the court decide that issue. Believe me, I'd like this. I didn't sign on to this job or run for it to be a judge. If I wanted to do that, I'd be a judge now in my home state. I don't want to be a judge. I hate this job. But all of my colleagues here were telling everybody how awful the process is. Let me be completely blunt about it. It's like democracy. It's a lousy form of government, except no one's figured out another way. Now, I can turn around and I can say to this particular person whose wife has come forward and said it's been abused, I can say, I tell you what, we're going to disregard that, and we're going to confirm you anyway. Or I can say, I don't believe it, therefore, I'm not going to tell these fellas, which I have done on other matters unrelated to wife beating. There's been more nominees sent up here with the last two administrations that have had drug problems I've never even told these folks about. Because they happened 10, 20, 30 years ago. So I take the heat and I'll take the responsibility and I'll continue to do as long as I'm chairman, no matter what these guys think of this process. Okay? Number one. Number two, when an allegation of consequence comes forward, I do not have the recourse to send it to the courts. I have the recourse only to send it to my colleagues. There is no other institutional way of doing it. I made a judgment on this one. My trust was violated by somebody. And then the fat was in the fire. But we'd be in the same position if the day before the hearing began, Ms. Hill, unrelated to any statement of this committee, stood up and held a press conference and said, as I spoke with counsel, as the possibility could happen from the White House, and just held a press conference. Be in the same spot. We could say we're not going to resolve that. Let's put this nomination on hold and send it to the courts. Not a possibility. Not able to do that, no matter what my colleagues who are now telling everybody how horrible this process is. Now let me say another thing. This isn't over. Your grandfather's right. You have no right to give up. There's compelling arguments to be made for you, and they may end up being made by me and others. For example, one of the arguments made against you constantly by those who opposed your nomination is here's a guy who's sought this. He's suckered it. He's gone out and he's laid down for people for it. And he's not dumb. A guy who wanted this in the beginning. I heard people coming to us and testifying saying, you wanted this and planned this since the late 70s. Well, if you planned this in the late 70s and you did this, you're one of the dumbest people I've ever run across in my life. And you don't impress me as being dumb. Your defenders here haven't even been smart enough to figure out to make that defense for you. My job is not to defend you or to prosecute you. It's to see to it you get a fair shot in a system that's imperfect, but it's a good system. Now, everybody points out what hadn't been made here. Every expert that's ever testified before me in this committee on an issue that I do know something about, and I've spent, with the exception of maybe one person on this committee, more time dealing with abuse against women and the surrounding circumstances than anybody else in the Senate. And every expert comes forward and says, there's a pattern. It doesn't happen in isolated incidents. It's a pattern. If there's not a pattern, to me, that's probative. That has some dispositive weight. No one's proved a pattern here of anything. We're not finished yet, but no one's proved a pattern. Again, these people have decided already once and for all they're for you or against you. You need better lawyers. You need to hire me. I'm getting fed up with this stuff about how terrible this system is. I hear everybody talk about how terrible the primary system is. We're big boys. I knew when I ran for president everything was free game. Anybody who runs for the Supreme Court or is appointed to the Supreme Court, to be more precise, should understand. It's not Boy Scouts, it's not Cub Scouts. In the case of the presidents, for the right to be leader of the free world, and no one ever said it would be easy. And whoever goes in the Supreme Court is going to determine the fate of this country more than anybody. For the next 20 years, we're going to have people, scrupulous and unscrupulous, respond and react. And this is not a referendum on whether or not sexual harassment is a grave offense. I said from the beginning, this is about whether or not sexual harassment occurred. And lastly, Judge, with me from the beginning and at this moment until the end, the presumption is with you. Now we're going to hear more witnesses. They're going to come in and corroborate your position and hers. We'll find out whether they're telling the truth or not as best as we are capable of doing, just like you as a judge are when you look them in the eye and make a judgment. So, Judge, this is less directed at you than it is to my pontificating colleagues, Democrat and Republican alike. So, Judge, I have not made my judgment based upon this proceeding because we have not heard all the evidence. And the last thing I'll point out, the next person that refers to an FBI report as being worth anything obviously doesn't understand anything. FBI explicitly does not, in this or any other case, reach a conclusion. Period. Period. So, Judge, there's no reason why you should know this. The reason why we cannot rely on the FBI report, you wouldn't like it if we did. because it is inconclusive. They say he said, she said, and they said, period. So when people wave an FBI report before you, understand, they do not reach conclusions. They do not make, as my friend points out more adequate, they do not make recommendations. So, Judge, it's no fun, but there are certain things in our society that have occurred that the nature of the offense is an offense that is almost always takes place where there can be and will be no corroborating evidence, and all of us are susceptible to that errant charge. And if you don't think that we're going to see individuals up here charged, individuals in the Senate, individuals in the workplace charged, maybe even not without merit charged. So, Judge, it is, everybody says we know how you feel. No one can know how you feel. That always excites me when I hear people tell me how it feels. Oh, you lost a family. Oh, I don't know how it feels. Oh, you lost this. I know how it feels. Well, you went through that, and they ruined your reputation by it. I know how it feels. No one knows how it feels. But I hope we stop this stuff. The press did nothing wrong. It is not their fault. It is the nature of what happens here when something goes public. This is not a right and wrong until it comes down to a decision about you. And the presumption is with you. With me, the presumption is with you, and in my opinion, it should be with you until all the evidence is in and people make a judgment. So, Judge, I don't know exactly how you feel, but you've clearly demonstrated how you feel. And some of us, if not all of us here, have an inkling how you feel. And like I said, I ran for this job to affect foreign policy, to affect domestic policy, not to be a judge. If I wanted to be a judge, I'd arranged for that a long time ago. Judge, wait till it's over. It will be over in the next 2 days to make your judgment. You will not be unaffected by this no matter what happens. Nobody goes through the white-hot glare of this process at any level for any reason and comes out unaffected. But Judge, nobody's reputation is a snapshot. It's a motion picture. And the picture's being made, and you've made a vast part of it the last 43 years.
Yes, way. Judge, the chairman's a good man. He frequently votes with me.
Judge, I voted against you. I have nothing to do with this. I voted against you. You and I disagree, like you said, on philosophy as I can best understand it. Judge, go home. Do whatever you're going to do. Thank you for being here. You're entitled to come back anytime you want to come back after we hear the rest of the witness, and no one should make any judgment about anybody till we hear the rest of the witnesses. We're recessed for 15 minutes.